I'm going to show you how to sew the knit binding on the Luna Loungewear. I'm going to be sewing the strap in this example. So I have already cut my strap piece out using the pattern, and I've marked the star markings that are on the pattern piece with these two clips right here. So those markings are very important. You want to make sure that you transfer those over. I've already sewn my strap into a loop by sewing the short ends together, right sides together. So our first step, I'm going to line up the seam of the strap with the side seam of the cami. So just like that, and clip it in place. And now I'm going to match up these star markings with both of the neckline. So each side, there's one, and there's the other. And now we're going to take this to the machine. You can see that the armhole is longer than the strap. So while we sew, we're going to be stretching the binding gently so that it matches the length of the cami. So we have these right sides together, and we're going to line up the raw edges as we go. So I am going to sew this with a straight stitch. This first step is acting more like a basting stitch, kind of holding everything in place. So take this to the machine, and we're going to use a 3/8 inch seam allowance. I am going to lengthen my stitch length to about a 4.5. Now the first inch or so, I'm not stretching my binding. So once I get that sewn and anchored in place, now I'm going to stretch while I sew. So just stretch it gently. You're not stretching so much that you're stretching the body of the cami, you're just stretching that binding to match the length. We're just gonna go from one neckline to the other. So for the other side, without stretching, I'm just gonna line up the raw edge of the cami and the binding and grab it about 1 inch from end, because remember, I didn't stretch the first inch. I don't want to stretch the last inch to keep things lined up and matching. So just take your time, make sure your raw edges stay lined up, maintain that 3/8 inch seam allowance, and we're almost there. So there is the binding sewn to the right side. And now we're going to, let's go this direction. Flip that binding upward. And if you'd like, you can give it a quick press, kind of hold it in place. Oh. I'm gonna go just a couple more stitches right here to, you can see that kind of broke free. I didn't back stitch when I started. So just gonna get that real nice and secure there, because otherwise I risk that end slipping out on this next step. All right, so the binding is pressed up away from our seam. I'm gonna flip it over so that we have the wrong side. And now we're gonna fold that binding in half to encase this raw edge. Now knit doesn't fray, so we can just fold this over and attach and then trim the excess. Or if you like, you can fold it over one time to enclose that raw edge and then fold it over one more time and pin it in place. It is completely up to you. I'm gonna go ahead and enclose that edge. So I'm folding over about 1/4 inch and then fold over again to wrap it around the raw edge of the neckline. So I'm just gonna work my way around. I'm using Wonder Clips to hold everything in place. I prefer that to pins for this step. but I definitely still have pins in my sewing bin. I like them for some things, just not all. And I like clips for some things and not all as well. So when you fold this over, you want to, see that line of stitching right there? You want to cover that line with the binding. So now we get to the strap. And so the strap, you're going to continue on your way. If you did not fold under the edge, you're just going to keep folding it like this. So you're going to have one side folded in because that's your seam allowance when we folded the binding upward. So you would just fold it over like that and then trim the excess. But because I folded the edge in, I need to fold the edge in here and fold it over one more time. Just like when you make double fold bias tape. Same concept. So, just making sure that all of my ends are tucked in. And you can iron this beforehand if you like. Whichever works better for you. I tend to iron it a little bit afterwards. Some spray starch can help keep some really finicky fabric in place. I wouldn't recommend doing this with anything super slinky, like an ITY, that interlock twist yarn fabric. That might be a challenge. So something more stable. This is Pylos. It looks woven, but it is actually a knit. And I got it from Serge Fabric, and I'm really loving it. It has all the properties of a knit. It's made just like a knit, but it actually looks more like a woven. So cotton lycra is also an excellent fabric for this. So now we're going to sew it in place. We do want to switch to a zigzag stitch for this, and I'm going to make my stitch width a 3.5 and my stitch length a 5. There we go. And we're just gonna sew right along that binding here. So I've already done one side. We're gonna sew along the binding side of our seam. And I like to start at the side seam and then just work my way around. We're just gonna go in a giant loop here. So you want to straighten out that binding if your cami is gathered a little bit along the armhole. Just gently straighten it out as you're sewing. And if you did use pins, make sure that you remove those as you're going along. You don't want to sew over your pins. You risk breaking a needle or breaking a pin. And those broken pins and needles can go flying and hit you in the eye. I've actually missed a pin before, and my needle hit it and my needle broke, and it shot up and hit me right in the glasses. So I'm very careful not to sew over pins. You want to sew right along the edge of the strap because you're closing that fold up. So you don't want to sew in the middle. You want to sew right along the edge where all those pieces come together. And there we have it. We have our knit band, and this is our bralette. So there you go. That is how you sew the knit binding on the Luna Loungewear.